You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
We really focused on social capital within it. So we wanted to help students develop those networks and relationships right from the off. So induction's really important for that, in fact, pre-induction. We want them to develop confidence and purposeful skills. We want them also, though, to learn about other cultures and challenges across society. They're kind of beyond their subject, if you like, and link their subject, their academic learning, to the real world, and hopefully then progress to successful futures.
Hello, welcome to the Campus podcast. I'm Miranda Prynne, editor of Campus, which is Times Higher Education's platform where academics and university staff can share their expertise in the form of practical advice for their peers across higher education.
And I'm Eliza Compton, deputy editor of Campus. Hi Miranda, it's nice to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, great to have you back. I missed you on our last podcast. This week we are going to hear from a Vice-Chancellor who is a champion for widening access to and support through higher education to achieve greater student success, as well as a sustainability advocate and environmental scientist by training. There are many feathers in the cap of Eunice Simmons, who has led the University of Chester since 2020. So, Eliza, you had the pleasure of talking to Eunice. What spurred you to reach out to her for the podcast?
I really enjoyed our conversation immensely, so it was a great pleasure. I decided to reach out to Eunice for all the reasons that you've mentioned, Miranda. I was really keen to talk to her about social capital and citizenship and how these ideas fit into university leadership strategy, and also why networks and connections with the local community are key to Chester and to universities generally. Eunice has done lots of work with groups such as TASO and GRIT in the UK that focus on widening participation, and so she comes to her role with really a wealth of knowledge and passion, and she's embedded these ideas in Chester with initiatives such as the Citizen Student Strategy, which she talks about, which takes students from pre-induction through to graduation and beyond, and helps them to put their studies in the context of society as a whole.
Hi Eunice, and welcome to the Campus podcast.
Hi Eliza, good to be here.
Well, it's very nice to be speaking to you today. To start with, I wanted to ask you to give our listeners a little bit of context, to tell us a bit about the University of Chester, where you are.
Sure. Well, the university started as a teacher training college in 1839, the first, if not one of the first in the country. And it's really grown from there. 1960s, it took female students in for the first time and then really did grow. So based in the northwest of England in the beautiful city of Chester, but we also teach across the region. And large areas for us are nursing, health, social care. We also have a new medical school and our first graduate entry medics starting this September, which is very exciting. But we also have a very large business school and great arts and humanities. So we're really a sort of full faculty university, which is great. About 15,000 students, a third postgraduate, and a very big international contingent, which adds significantly to the university's culture.
And you've been Vice-Chancellor there since 2020, is that right?
That's right. I took over in January 2020 and really went straight into COVID from there. So it was a very interesting way to learn about a new university.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that at Chester you have quite a focus on the idea of social capital and the role of the university within your area. Can you tell us a bit about what social capital actually is, because I don't know that it's a clearly understood idea, and why it's important for universities?
Certainly. Well, social capital is a term originally used by economists, really, as one of the three dimensions of capital. So economic capital, we all know about, cultural capital also, and social capital, where it impacts in society. So with my environmental hat on, originally it was used in the context of talking about unequal access to natural resources, which couldn't be explained merely by where those resources were. And I can really relate to the fact that societal structure and human networks play a huge role in how we actually exploit resources. So if you take that away from the sort of environmental context, economists, anthropologists, sociologists, they've all developed and interpreted the phrase differently. But generally, in general use, social capital now refers to the connectedness or the network of relationships between people, which enable a society to function.
And I think you have really embedded that in Chester through your citizen student program. Can you tell us a bit about what Chester does in order to facilitate these different kinds of skills that you need to be a citizen?
Certainly. Well, first of all, we set up a social capital steering group really just to explore the concept, because as you said at the beginning, it's not well understood. And in fact, as it's used in many different ways. So we wanted to look at its potential and significance for underrepresented groups in the university, and also to consider how we might communicate this concept to different demographics of students and, if you like, co-develop its relevance to Chester. So the citizen student strategy, we really focused on social capital within it. So we wanted to help students develop those networks and relationships right from the off. So induction's really important for that, in fact, pre-induction. We want them to develop confidence and purposeful skills. We want them also, though, to learn about other cultures and challenges across society. They're kind of beyond their subject, if you like, and link their subject, their academic learning, to the real world, and hopefully then progress to successful futures. So we did concentrate on social capital as one of the three pillars of the strategy. To bring that to life a bit, we've got all sorts of workshops in faculties with appealing titles: Daring to Disagree, Proud to Be, Combat Hate, I'm Remarkable, Make Your Mark, all that sort of thing, to attract students. So we don't give them a sociological lecture. We actually bring it to life for them and get them participating very early.
Do you think universities can do more generally to fulfil their social purpose in terms of developing students as people and not just as, potentially productive graduates?
I think that's right. It's the difference, isn't it, between education and training. And I always say to everybody, we're great at our subjects, but we're not just a training college. We are a higher education institution. So we do have a real mission at the individual level to help produce mature and capable graduates, and the social capital focus and citizenship really helps. So we have service level agreements with important institutions around us. We work really very, very closely with the local authorities, which particularly in the sectors we're in is important, but also the businesses for sure. The theatre, the cathedral, all the racecourse, all of the big institutions around us that help contribute to civic life. So that's in Chester, obviously, but likewise in Warrington with the Youth Zone, etc. There are always important institutions outside a university, which it is good for the universities to engage with, adds huge value to the students. I think across the university sector, at the institutional level, there's a good relationship between universities and their environment and their locality. At Chester, actually, we're getting better at this every year, because this summer we ran a fantastic large-scale Chester Festival of Ideas, which was hugely successful. I thought it was going to be one day. And in the end, the people leading it, they decided, the PVC Research Innovation, his team, had decided that they had so many events that they ran 90 events over 4 days. Which was fabulous, some outstanding international level speakers, and then some very local activities looking at the ruins or the Roman artifacts or whatever. We're also relaunching our strategy with a strengthened theme of civic value, because it plays so well with the students and how they are really trying to fit into society as it's changing.
I saw on LinkedIn, I think the other day, you were mentioning about welcoming new students to Chester, and as in the UK, we're just at the very beginning of our academic year. Are students themselves changing in regards to their attitudes to this sort of work?
I think they're very much more aware of self-growth and self-development, which is a good thing. They're also very well aware of their mental health, but I think that leaves them vulnerable because they overthink quite often, and they worry. They don't realise that being worried is sometimes just part of being a student. Things do get tricky and deadlines, converge, etc. So we try really hard to support students at induction to understand what the support network is, but how they can be resilient and support themselves as well. and become stronger as individuals as they go through their university journey. So induction for us isn't just a 1 week in the autumn, important though that is. We do lots of work pre-induction, lots of great stuff on the web, ability for the students to link up with each other in their cohorts before they come. We do good support within the accommodation to make sure that people aren't isolated and lonely. So there's a very good student life system. And then once they're here, we obviously can give them great academic support. And we work really well with the student union. They do different things to us. They add great value, but we sort of we're going in the same direction, if you like. And they really do support the students to represent themselves well and get involved and, really live a fuller student life, even when some of them are part-time. A lot of them are earning. We know about 70% of our first-year students need to earn, which is huge compared to a few years ago.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. There's been quite a lot of written about that recently, hasn't there, about the competing demands on students' time. And coming out of COVID as well, this cohort has had such a different experience of education.
And everything that's been said about them finding it slightly harder to connect and perhaps coming with a weaker friendship base from school or college is absolutely true. So I think the reason we're trying so hard is because we cannot assume that the students come with a ready-made confidence and a strong home network that will see them through the first few weeks, etc. So we really do focus in on supporting them to make the most of university. And then it's really interesting where they then take it on the next year and support others. So we do quite a bit around peer mentoring and looking out for others. That seems to work pretty well across all the different types of students we've got.
Well, definitely for young people, when it's information that comes, or anyone really, not just young people, when it's information that comes from your cohort, it lands much more effectively somehow.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely right. They trust them, and that's quite right.
Yeah. It's just humans, I guess. We're very much like that. I wanted to ask you too, when you started at Chester in 2020, one of the first things that you did was set up this Race Equality Challenge group. And I wanted to know a little bit about that. I know Chester's very active in areas of widening participation. So can you tell us a bit about the race equality work that you do?
Yes, so I set it up in response to the George Floyd tragedy. And in doing so, what I was trying to do was create a new dialogue within the university about race and racism. And we called it a challenge group rather than a committee to ensure that its students and staff members could actually call out areas of work for more in-depth scrutiny. So, for example, we started by looking at the visual images we use and to ensure they're reflective of our population and indeed, Eliza, those who we would want to attract. That's really important. But also that internally our hiring and other HR strategies are actively anti-racist, not just paying lip service to it. So since 2020, we've trained lots of staff. We've looked at all our basic processes through a race lens. One of our most effective long-standing initiatives year to year has been to create paid roles for student race advocates. And they work with different areas of the university to improve our functions and our processes, really, to counter passive or institutional racism. And they are outstanding individuals who will go on and become leaders. So we support them to grow, but gosh, they support the university to be a much more genuinely inclusive place.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading some of the testimonials on your website. So do you go out and find the student race advocates, or do they come to you and self-select, as it were? How does the process work?
Bit of both. It's an open and transparent interview process. We get many more applicants than we can take, but those applicants we then keep connected into and draw them into our work in other ways.
And that seems to me very much loops back to what we were talking about earlier about things like social capital and networks and giving students an opportunity to make different kinds of connections, perhaps. I was wondering too, with widening participation, do you see it as something that has value beyond graduate outcomes to having a broader social impact?
Certainly. I mean, my father left school at 14, and after a couple of jobs went into the Air Force early, and then the Second World War was his university, basically. And then he had a very successful career, but he would never have had that successful career without that strange opportunity. And we don't need it to be a crisis. What we should be thinking about is how can we create opportunities to find talent wherever it is and ensure that those people get a chance to be at university, and really, really importantly, to flourish when they're there, because that is a given. So I chair something called TASO, the TASO board, and that's Transforming Access and Student Outcomes. And that was set up through a competitive process, actually, with King's College, NTU, and BIT. And some years ago, and we've just had renewed funding from the Office for Students because its value is being seen. And what it's actually doing is researching with universities, almost all the universities across the sector now, as to what works in both access and success. So universities have paid many, many thousands of pounds over the years to support widening access, but they haven't looked hard enough at whether it really is working, because we think we know what works, and actually, because we're not on the receiving end of all of our good intentions, it may not actually be working. So TASO is doing some fantastic research in this area, both commissioned research and its own research, and the universities are basically turning their research capacity towards this challenge.
Now, when you say NTU, that's Nottingham Trent University, where you were previously the Deputy Vice-Chancellor. And so in this work, have they identified things that do actually work with widening participation? So, or can you give us an example, perhaps from Chester, of an initiative that's really seen visible or tangible results?
Well, longitudinal relationships with the same schools and colleges. And that's partly coming all that way back to building relationships, actually. It's a confidence that if the students then go there to that university, Chester or elsewhere, they will get a good outcome. So with widening access, it's all about building a strong team within the university, but just as importantly, knowing who and where to connect in outside the university, and also recognising the huge challenges that the schools are under in terms of resourcing. And they don't want to take students out on trips now to universities in the main. They don't have time in the curriculum to do an awful lot of external stuff. So we have to fit around that. And what we do is make a lot of our sessions very relevant to the curriculum, but with a wider message of how the new knowledge was created in that particular subject area. For example, some great role models of students who've come from potentially less traditional backgrounds, but become really successful. We've got great examples. I mean, I know students in my through my career who've gone from further education to PhDs because their opportunities have been there for them. Their talent's been spotted. They've had mentoring, and they've developed the confidence they might not have had in the first place. So I absolutely don't believe people lack aspiration. They lack knowledge about what opportunities are that they actually could take themselves and genuinely benefit from. So it's patronizing to think about going in and telling people about how great universities and university sector is. It's actually really important to engage them in thinking about relevance to them.
Absolutely. I mean, representation and visible pathways are so important, aren't they? And are most of your domestic students from around Chester, or are students travelling from very far to come to the university?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, Eliza. So we look really hard at our GIS map. So we have fascinating maps for each subject area as to where students apply from. So a lot of students come from the Northwest for sure, within an hour's travel. And some of those stay travelling and commute. They don't all come and live in one of our residences. But we also have quite a few students from London now, from across the Northeast, and across the West Midlands, certainly. So we have a bigger footprint probably nationally than we had a few years ago, which is interesting. Having said that, we are very conscious that the commuter student is an important component of our student body. That's really interesting. And it does differ. If I looked at the nursing students, for example, they'd be more local, because some of them can actually envisage where they might go and work subsequently. They really do think ahead, students in in our health and social care subjects. Whereas business students, they're more eclectic. They'll come from all over, because they know we work with national and international companies. So to them, it's not a deal breaker that we're in Chester and not in the heart of London. So it's really fascinating data to look at and to understand, because the more you understand about your intake, and the more the academics on the receiving end of the intake, if they understand more about the students, everybody gets off to a better start.
Well, I can imagine as a leader too of the institution, it's incredibly helpful to know not just what your students are studying, but as you say, where they've come from and what their likely motivations are.
That's right. We do a great survey and collect some of that information, and then the same students, do a later survey, and with them we compare the sort of responses that they gave, and that's all part of them changing sort of while they're at university, which is good.
That's the great part about the university journey, definitely. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your cohort, because as we sort of talked a bit briefly before we started recording, Chester has got a large cohort of female students as opposed to male students, which I think is relatively unusual. I did read that it's due to your nursing programs, as you said, nursing, midwifery and teaching. And I wondered whether this makeup, this balance of students had an influence on how the university was governed, or how it functioned, whether it fed into the life of the university at all.
That's interesting. When I arrived in 2020, on the senior team, there was only one woman. So you can imagine that we have changed that somewhat. And we have some great female leaders across the institution, outstanding female leaders now. Maybe they've come through partly because of the subject mix, but also probably because of the culture. But I wouldn't say that it is as obvious as you might think, because we teach across Chester in different sites. We have some wonderful facilities strung out in a sort of north-south ribbon right down to the river. And so we use the whole city, if you like. So we also teach in Birkenhead, in Warrington and Shropshire. So the student body is never all in the same place. So the gender mix isn't quite so obvious. I'd say probably more importantly, the subjects that we study actually keep us very close to external sectors, so that we never feel very insular, which is good. And we have created in Chester, though, a new female leaders group, because they're female chief executives of most of the main institutions now. So we've just developed a new leadership program, which we're launching, and we're mentoring women across the area, across the locality, which is going to be very, very exciting this winter.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you a little bit about family and academia, actually, and I wondered whether having more women on management makes perhaps family life a bit easier, if there's programs now happening at Chester that facilitate family life. I know that for anyone really, male or female, juggling family life and a busy professional life is difficult.
Yes, I think it makes us more aware, and we're comfortable mentioning family matters, which might impact on work in some way. We are a very caring institution. I mean, coming from a Christian foundation, one would hope that would be the case. Not always a given. But what we really do try and think about is caring responsibilities across the whole sort of age profile of staff. So yes, of course, the child bit is important. Children are important, but we were increasingly finding that elderly parents are a huge call on our staff's caring time. So it isn't quite, again, a split right down on gender lines, for sure, because there seems to be slightly more equal responsibilities being taken at that end, which is great. We have to be really conscious of that. So, yeah, we have some good HR policies that support it. We, after COVID, went back to more of a 60-40 pattern, as many places did. And to be honest, our staff are more productive with that. And I think it does help in juggling the responsibilities. I would have loved it, when I had been a younger academic with children, for sure.
So 60-40, that's working from home and working on site?
Yeah, 60% on site at least. I mean, lots of academics are there, of course, full time when they're teaching across the working week. But our professional services also have that model in the main, unless they're student facing. And that's also allowed us to sell buildings and shrink our footprint somewhat, because we were in a bit of a sort of sprawling estate of all sorts of different properties across Chester. And I've managed to rationalise that quite a lot, and obviously save on costs and wasted space.
Yeah, it's interesting. COVID really has brought out some very useful working practices, not least of which is that flexibility to be able to work remotely.
It does take trust.
Yeah.
You have to trust your staff that they're not going to take advantage. And at the same time, they know when they have to switch off. So it's interesting, this new focus on always on or whatever. You have to be pretty strict with your staff. If they're off, they're genuinely off, because they get used to kind of muddling the two. And I think it takes a little bit of discipline and a constant discussion, I think, with managers. And some of our managers are far more adept at recognizing where the challenges are for their workforce, even when they don't see them every day.
Yeah, definitely a challenge for management, being connected enough to be able to understand when people are requiring support in setting those kinds of boundaries. For my final question, you've actually very nicely introed this, I think, in mentioning the rationalisation of buildings and space. So you are an environmental scientist by background, and I wanted to ask you about the review that Chester, I think, is undertaking according to environmental and workplace and social objectives of your spaces, and how are you going? How's that progressing? What have you learnt, and where are you headed?
Where are we heading? Gosh, this has been a very interesting process. Very interesting process, because some of it started on efficiency. I could see that buildings weren't being used, and I could see that offices certainly weren't being used post-COVID. So I've said anyone who wants an office full-time themselves can have one, but we are moving away from the individual office and have done a lot of work in that area. So we've moved off a couple of campuses and started with those staff. When they moved onto our main campus, they didn't work in individual offices. They got some superbly reworked, remodeled space, which has very, very nice areas for meetings, individual spaces that they can use. And then we had some old 1960s residences, which I couldn't afford to put bathrooms in. It didn't make any sense. The plumbing didn't work. So we turned them into individual spaces during COVID that could be booked on the phone. And that's worked very well. So we're keeping those for the moment. So that started us thinking about booking spaces for academics and professional services to work in when they came onto campus. And so we've got a lovely mixture in most of our buildings now of shared open space, all sorts of storage, lockers. I'm really into lockers, Eliza, all sorts of lockers and storage for staff to make it as easy as possible for them to have their stuff near where they're working. But also very easy bookable spaces. And so very nice offices, all kitted out, but they can just drop in. And if they want to do some deep writing, etc., they can book them for much, much longer than a few hours a day. You know, they can leave stuff in there. But it's very important, I think, to use the estate efficiently, because otherwise we're just wasting money that should be in front of the students. You know, we could have more staff being paid if I wasn't paying heating bills on empty rooms. And most staff have really got into this. They're okay with it. They understand the logic, and they don't particularly want an empty room sitting there while they're maybe working from home. So that's been a massive culture change. So then the challenge is, how do you create the community feel with people just being around rather than transactionally coming in to do work and maybe going away again? So we've looked at all sorts of other gathering spaces, as I call them, and we've redone our dining spaces, and we're thinking constantly about what will keep people on campus to keep the vibe without them needing to have their individual office.
And what's the feedback been like? What have people liked?
Well, we've had some grumbles for sure.
Well, I'm asking you about the positive feedback.
Positives are people get it. People realise that we aren't wasting money, and they also realise that we haven't got the money to put up new buildings at the moment, in common with much of the sector, but we are really doing a nice job on refurbishing some older building stock, and then they're making use of that. So we've had very, very good comments. We're relocating our School of Education, for example, from one campus to another, and we are almost about to open it. We're just refurbishing to make some superb spaces. And the academics and the technical staff have been great in supporting that move. very few murmurs about it. They'll be really happy to be at the heart of the other campus. I know they will, and will relaunch with a fanfare into very, very nice, newly remodeled building. Well,
that seems like a terrific note for us to finish on, looking positively into the future, into the coming academic year. Eunice, I wish you all the best for 24-25, and thank you so much for your time today. It's been really terrific chatting with you.
Thanks, Eliza. It's been great to engage with THE.
It's clear that Eunice is someone who really aims at equality of not just opportunities, but of the outcomes. So much of what she has put in place at Chester is designed to achieve this. But she actually speaks about all of it with such a sort of calm matter-of-factness, and how they are addressing these, really challenging issues around student support, inequity, racism, post-COVID workplace kind of norms. She almost makes it sound easy, which I think we all know it's not. I was particularly struck by her point when she was talking about the citizen students and social capital, and how that all plays into what Chester offer. And she mentioned how that is the difference between education and training. And that's somehow so obvious, but I could never have distilled it in those terms.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Reflecting back on that conversation, Eunice is so good at articulating how all these elements of university life join up to help students thrive during their education and to set them up for success beyond.
I was about to say it's exactly that. It's what's impressive is that awareness of the entire student journey from, she talks about working with schools and actually deliberately making efforts to design their outreach programs to really help and facilitate the work with schools. But that goes all the way through, as you say, to the kind of post-university careers and more.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for this episode of the Campus Podcast. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in reading more advice on topics such as widening access, student support, developing engaged citizens, and more, you'll find this all on our website at timeshighereducation.com/campus. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please like and subscribe, and perhaps recommend it to a friend or colleague, and we'll see you next time.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.